Welcome to the first episode of Fiction or Submission. What you're about to hear are 3 stories, one based off of a submission from one of you, the other 2 of my own creation. Do you think you can guess which is true? In the end, you'll find out. But before we get started, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, because after this, you'll want to play the next round of Fiction or Submission. I-65, notorious for wrecks and crashes. Unfortunately, it's my only option for my drive to work. So I've learned to love the holdups and traffic jams since discovering podcasts. Before gas went up, I never really minded sitting in traffic. Interesting voices coming out of my radio. My sunglasses allowing me to stare directly at other motorists without them knowing. People are weird. I'd usually have a snack and a drink. Now that gas is $8 a gallon, I can't afford it. So last week when I saw a sign saying detour, I cut off 3 people to make the exit. I'd never been off the interstate, but my GPS showed it was a simple route parallel to it. It goes down to the next exit passing the wreck and back on 65. It just so happens that everyone else had the same idea, so it was just as backed up. Now, completely out of options, I decided to make the best of it via the usual routine. Now, before I really start the story, I need to say the podcast was about stand-up comedy, so it in no way affected my state of mind. I just wanted to say that. I started feeling weird as I started paying attention to every detail of the neighborhood. Sitting in traffic slow enough not to have to press the gas with a brake lets you do that. And I'm not trying to judge people for something dumb like Christmas lights up in June, even though it was June and I did see Christmas lights. But it was more than that. It started with a squirrel. It just looked at me. Now, at first, obviously, I didn't think much of it other than I just locked eyes with a freaking squirrel. But then 3 yards up, a dog, staring at me. I know it sounds crazy, but out of a parade of cars going 5 miles an hour, they looked at me. I watched their heads slowly follow me as I passed. In my side view mirror, I could see they still watched as they got smaller and smaller. A woman looked out her window at me. A guy on his lawnmower. He had garden gnomes like those paintings with the eyes that follow you. For some reason, out of hundreds of people, I had everyone's attention. The busy residential area turned to trees, and I was relieved that no one was really around to look at me. But then the trees turned into an open cemetery. Stone markers of various shape, size, and color. Name after name, easily read at 5 miles an hour. Old names. Names parents give to kids they hate. I focused on one name. Eldritch Fivder. Maybe it's because I struggled to pronounce the name in my head, but I didn't even notice the fingers wrapping around the stone. I say fingers, but they were like long pointy black spikes, and its face peeked over the top, looking at me. Maybe I was too far away, or maybe it was just too strange looking to understand, but I couldn't make sense of its face. It hid behind the tombstone, keeping eye contact as I passed. When I switched to the side mirror, it was gone. The cemetery got smaller and smaller as I got trapped in a daze, wondering what the hell that was. My GPS sounded off, forcing me to pay attention to the road. I was shaking. Probably a prank, I said out loud, not convincing even myself. For some reason, I felt the need to check my rearview mirror one last time. I began to tilt my head, and with my peripheral, In the mirror, I see fingers wrapping over the back seat from the rear compartment. My line of vision continued to a reflection absent of fingers, but I knew I saw them. I stared for another second and looked back at the car ahead, who had turned on its blinker. I whipped into a gas station, jumped out, and opened my rear hatch. Nothing. Feeling relieved, I get back in my car and jump on the interstate. I turn on my podcast, trying to forget about the thing in the cemetery and the fingers. I'd be lying if I said it worked, because soon I was checking the mirror every 5 seconds. I saw the fingers again. And then after looking back at the road, I'd look up again to see arms wrapping around the seat. The periodic split-second image in my peripheral created a flipbook of this entity crawling from my rear compartment to the back seat. It only flashed in the corner of my eye, but I could feel it was really there. I got off my exit and again whipped into a gas station. Terrified, I get out of the car and go into the store without looking back. I went to the disease-ridden bathroom and splashed some water on my face, trying to stop whatever psychotic break I was having. After a minute, my heart slowed down a little and I walked out back through the store. I grabbed a drink, and as I was paying, I glanced out the window towards my car. A figure in the back seat. My stomach dropped and my heart started to bounce around my chest. There was something in my back seat, but only sometimes. I left the store and started across the parking lot. My car has decent factory tint, but I was definitely looking at someone in my back seat. I opened my door and glanced over my seat. Nothing. I get in and start the car. It's there, in the mirror, just out of view. I couldn't take it home, not to my family. I just started driving, hoping it would leave within the next 15 miles. I drove slow so I had time to think, looking every few minutes to see it for 1 second. I came up on my road and just kept driving. It was still there. I drove around for another 20 minutes before pulling into a church parking lot. If demons are real, I feel it'd be easier to get one out of a car than a house. Eventually, I drove away feeling stupid. It got dark and it was no longer a flash. It was a constant silhouette in the darkness of my back seat. I found myself back on 65 on the way back to the cemetery. I thought if I just went back and begged it to get out, maybe it would listen. I turned in and crept through where I could see the tombstone with a strange name. I probably sat for 10 minutes, not saying a word. And finally, I just begged it to get out. I explained that this was where it needed to be. I waited a few minutes and got back on the road. I checked my mirror multiple times, feeling relieved to see a dark, empty seat. I couldn't know if anything was in the back compartment, but I felt a difference in the atmosphere, if that makes any sense. I felt alone. I jumped on the interstate and didn't see anything in my mirror the whole ride home. Obviously, my wife questioned why I was getting home so late. We've talked about the paranormal, so I knew she wouldn't think I was crazy, so I told her the whole story in case something weird started happening. But so far, so good. There's a weird stereotype that scientists aren't religious. Well, I know plenty of scientists that are, including myself. We don't go around thumping Bibles or anything, and most disregard religious books and organizations altogether. But between a magical explosion from nothing or an almighty magical entity, you'd be surprised at how many lean towards the latter. That's why when I graduated college with a degree in electromagnetics, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. It had haunted our town for 60 years. Not long after it was built, the family that lived in it was murdered. In broad daylight, a man running from the cops was cornered on their property and took cover in the house. After holding the family hostage, he killed them, and then himself. The house then belonged to the state, and there it sat, unoccupied, unless you ask its frequent passerbys. I can now verify that it stayed completely furnished, but we had always assumed it was because there were curtains for the people to peek around. At night, when the world was quiet, you could hear footsteps in the house. I know because I lived next door. When I was a kid, what intrigued me were things we knew barely anything about. Multiple dimensions, space, consciousness. From a young age, I knew there was some sort of afterlife. That our consciousness or soul could exist without the body. I'd seen it. I watched it for 15 years. Out my window. Across the yard. From the end of my driveway. I could always see something happening. A figure in the upper window. The rocking chairs on the porch going full throttle, even though there was no wind. I had a slumber party just so I could let the guys from school hear the door slamming all night. We snuck over and tried to look through the windows, but it was so dark you couldn't see anything. But you could hear everything. All the noise of a family on a Saturday morning, but with no talking. Cabinets shutting, doors closing, and what sounded like chairs being dragged across the floor. My parents assured me that no one lived there, but that they too heard the noises. We were Christians that never made it to church, and we didn't talk much about the paranormal, but they gave me the impression that it weirded them out. For the most part, we just tried to ignore it, and eventually I went to college 6 states over and lived in a nice apartment with like-minded people. We worked on 3 notable projects with renowned names in science and then parted ways, but with a promise. We all had our thing we wanted to do. Elliot had one focus, understanding the strange quantum movement occurring in electrons traveling between the atomic layers of material. Isaac, the oceans on Jupiter's moon Europa, and me, ghosts. But they believed my stories and agreed, as did I, to assist on each other's projects when we could fund them. Now, it's 10 years later and I've purchased my new house. It's right next to the one my parents left me when they died in a car crash. I went to the courthouse and it was as if they forgot they even owned the house. I put in a request to purchase, and a few weeks later they reached out with an offer that I was more than happy to pay, but I still countered and basically stole it. It was mine now. The haunted house next door. I could really unlock its secrets and be the first to prove that the electromagnetic force, which is our consciousness, can exist after our bodies are gone. All I needed now was funding. I had it all planned out. Fix the house up with as much tech as possible. Every inch recorded in every manner imaginable. With fixed meters detecting EMF and EVPs. And next door, the control center safely storing data. If what I remembered from when I was a kid is accurate, I'd have my funding in no time. I didn't want to touch a thing. The overgrowth of weeds and thorns matched the rough state of the house. Approaching it for the first time brought back that terrified curiosity. But now, knowing I could go in, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't trembling. I put the key in the lock and opened the front door. It made every sound you imagined it would, as it opened a portal to a scene frozen in time. 1950s Leave It to Beaver clone, but as if a buzzsaw had gone off inside. Bloodstains on the carpet and couch. The pink rocking horse now had black and red splotches, and a trail went up the curtain to the ceiling. This was a massacre. A book flies across the room, shattering a mirror, causing me to run towards the door. I rip it open and jump out as if crossing a finish line. I turn and look back at the darkness through the doorway, and the door slams. My heart was racing all the way back next door. I turned and looked back at the darkness through the doorway, and then the door slams. My heart was racing all the way back next door, and even later that night when I would think about it, I would have heart palpitations. 3 days later, Elliot arrived having a 2-year break, while the Large Hadron Collider was shut down to be updated. As a joke, I had him go in the house alone as I did, hoping for the same results, being very satisfied when he came back, screaming about floating chairs. I gave him a second to compose himself, and now as a believer, we both went in and wired it up. Not much happened when we were working. Aside from some footsteps, we were able to get up the cameras equipped with sensitive audio devices in every room, along with items we hoped would get interaction. A fire truck, a rocking horse, and a gun. Video and audio evidence in a controlled environment could get us some funding. We have everything ran to this house, and Elliot is setting up the live feed as I type. We plan on doing shifts to timestamp activity, in case it is as active as we think it will be. It'll be a long night, so I'm going to go finish up, but I guarantee I'll have an update for you tomorrow. "4 a.m. Twice a month for 6 months, and I still wasn't used to getting up early. I'm just not a morning person. I hate breakfast or eating early in general, and typically I have to lay awake in bed for like an hour or two before I get up. But on the days we traveled the 10 hours to North Carolina, my dad wanted us up and out the door. Once in the car, I could lean against my sister as she leaned against the window, and fall half back asleep for about an hour. By then, my family would be trying to force me to eat something, and after I'd play my Nintendo DS for the remaining 8 hours. Every trip was the same, like Groundhog Day, all but one. It even started differently from the others. We got up late. For once, I got to sleep in. Now, I wasn't complaining, but my dad was about his hangover headache. The night before was their anniversary, so of course they celebrated how miserable they are together. I sat where I did every time, in the back seat in between my sisters. We were all about a year apart, me being 12 and the oldest. It was the second of 3 fuel stops that I needed to get out and use the bathroom. When me and my dad entered the store, we split up. Him towards the counter and me towards the bathroom door, which was opening. A slender man slips out and holds the door open, saying, "I hope you don't plan on being in there long. I fucked it up." When I walked in, I instantly understood what he meant when the smell hit me in the face. I quickly did my business and got out hating the man the whole time. I looked around the store for my dad, and when I couldn't find him, I walked out to find him talking to the man by his car. My dad was the type to walk up to any car he admired and speak to its owner. The man's white convertible was just up his alley, and knowing he would drag on the conversation, I just went to the car. I was surprised when, not longer getting in the car, my dad did the same, probably because we were running behind, but all he did for the next 20 minutes was talk about how much he liked that white convertible. I tried to ignore it while diving deep into Mario 64, But my game was interrupted when my sister screamed. "What's wrong with his arm?" she yelled. We all looked out our window, and beside us was the man in the white convertible. As it passed in the lane next to us, we saw that the arm he had resting on the door was badly mangled, with skin and meat flapping in the wind. He had gashes and scrapes all over his face, and part of his cheek was missing, exposing his teeth. We all made audible sounds of disgust as he passed before bursting into conversation about what had just happened. That was before we saw the lights up ahead. Police and paramedics surrounding a white convertible that was flipped upside down, with the top completely collapsed. The door was pried open and a body was being loaded into an ambulance. We passed without saying a word, and it would be miles before my dad spoke up. He said a lot of different things, including stuff about driving safe and death, and assured us that we'd all saw the same thing, but couldn't explain it. It's been brought up a couple of times over the years, but for the most part, we just try to forget about the mangled man in the convertible. I hope you enjoyed these stories, and even though it seems impossible, one of them is true. If you guessed our third story of the family seeing the mangled driver in the white Cadillac moments after the wreck, you'd be correct. This story was submitted by Chaotic Bubbles and has been confirmed by the other members of her family. There are many things in this world we can't explain, and the man in the white Cadillac is just one of those things. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode of Fiction or Submission. Until then, check your back seat.